Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started. Allie, could we pause? Oh, perfect. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Investing in Place, Arts, Culture, and Community Power. My name is Jamie Sharp, and I'm the Senior Program Manager here at GIA. I use she or any pronouns, and I'm a light-skinned Black person. My hair is up in a ponytail today. I have bright pink earrings and a lime green top on. GIA is headquartered on the unceded land of the Lenape and Wappinger peoples. We ask you to join in acknowledging the Lenape and Wappinger communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. So just a few things before we get started today. Today's webinar will be recorded and shared along with the presentation slides. And any questions that we don't get to in our presentation today, we will send to our panelists afterwards and then share out via email with all of our registrants. So no worries there if you need to hop off early or if we don't get to your question today. Please be sure that you're reviewing the Zoom features so that you have an optimal experience with us. If you have a question for our technical team during the webinar, feel free to use the chat function and message either myself or LGC Tech. Otherwise, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit questions for our presenters. And if you would like your experience to include live captioning, select the closed caption or CC feature in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitles. How can arts funders effectively engage in place-based investment and community development? How can we intentionally build sustainable futures for this work for ourselves and our communities? In today's webinar, moderated by Joanna Taylor, leaders from the Culture and Community Power Fund and SV Create's Gilroy Arts Initiative will discuss how arts and community development sectors can collaborate to strengthen local ecosystems in support of community power and cultural self-determination. Through an interactive dialogue, speakers will reflect on the successes and challenges of navigating local power dynamics and cross-sector partnerships, and how funders can build more responsive, community-centered approaches to cultural investment. And without further ado, I will hand it off to Joanna.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, GIA. Thank you to everyone for being here today and bringing us together for this call where we're going to be discussing new collaborative models for funding community responsive arts work. I am Johanna Taylor. I am an associate professor at Arizona State University. I am a cultural policy researcher, and I study how artists and creative practitioners work in collaboration with government agencies, scientists, community groups, and others to shift civic systems. I will be moderating today's panel, and I'll be kicking it off with a very brief kind of research overview, framing from my standpoint, who's someone as someone who is a scholar, but also a practitioner in some ways in this space, about the background and current trends in this field before handing it over to our presenters to get into some tactical ideas that will hopefully give you some things to inspire you and move you forward in your own work. So, to kick it off, this funding at the intersection of arts, culture, and place with an emphasis on community power is not new across the US. It has a longstanding foothold and it continues today. Now, as the work is shifting, there's many names and ideas and modes of operating, but one thing is true. There's increasing interest and opportunities to expand this collaborative work with both arts and non-arts partners. One of the core tenets of this work overall is trust and a longstanding commitment with communities are invaluable in terms of thinking about co-creation and building longstanding partnerships. This goes beyond funding isolated programs and is about creating shared power. Another core tenet is in cross-sector collaboration, in thinking about how coming together with arts groups and non-arts alike is an effective strategy in coming together and thinking about ways that we can collectively address shared community goals in more intentional ways than anyone could do alone. This work is not new. It really goes back to over the past 100 years, there's been dedicated efforts on the parts of government, such as in the WPA Federal Arts Projects and the CETA Employment and Training Act work supporting artists across different sectors, as well as through community development efforts, which were supporting arts work, and really building to a head with the rise of creative placemaking led by ArtPlace earlier in this century that really brought together foundations and government agencies. So we've been building on a long-standing practice of what this looks like under different names and in different ways of working. Out of this really extensive history and foundational work, we also now have a lot of evidence that shows how people are invested and that there are many different outcomes. There are toolkits and field scans that ArtPlace produced, which continue to be invaluable resources, showing how collaborations in different sectors are important. Other leaders, such as some of the places mentioned on this slide, in addition to others, have developed models and provided evidence and are actively publishing reports about the work that they are doing across the many different ways in which this field works in different sectors and different communities around the country. This has also led to increased credibility as collaborative partners recognize that connecting with arts and culture is something that even if they haven't done it, they want to test out, and that we are seen as a collaborative instigator partner, able to go deeper in a way than anyone could do alone. So now in this present moment, there are expanding opportunities to change and think about things differently. So I'll just mention a few of the ways before then we get some more in-depth examples from our panelists. One of the ways is that government agencies and individual organizations alike are interested in embedding artists within the work that they're doing. This is provoking new ways of thinking, taking risks, sparking new ideas across lots of different sectors. The photos on this slide are of 3 artists recently named across New York State working in different agencies to further state level goals. Another opportunity is around economic precarity and really addressing precarious workers and employment stability across the country as this becomes an increasingly pressing issue. Basic income for artists programs are being tested out in pilots around the country, including in Minnesota, where the Springboard program has been going on for a number of years now, both in St. Paul as well as in rural Otter Tail County, really aligning how precarious artist workers are in alignment with other artist workers, and that together we can address some of these foundational economic questions for our communities. Another area of expanding opportunities is around arts and public health and well-being. Last year, Massachusetts became the first state in the country to establish a social prescription program, connecting healthcare workers with prescribing arts and cultural experiences as well as other things, and that there is evidence showing how deeper connection with arts and culture is an improvement for the health of our communities. This is also happening around the country, including of the state where I am in Arizona. So, out of all of these different shifts and opportunities and the establishment of awareness of this field, and it is now a time to grow and expand. This new generation of this work is about co-creating deeply with community. It isn't about investing in isolated individual programs, but rather about investing in identity and belonging and the capacity of our communities to determine their own future. What we are proposing today is that institutions are in the best position to shift their internal systems and values in order to stand with communities. This requires collaboration with community and with cross-sectoral partners. The panelists today offer stories and models from their own experiences, going deep into their work. We will make tangible connections for you to draw on and to hopefully inspire your own work in moving forward. So, to get us started, I'm going to next introduce our panelists before handing it off to them. Jackie Morrow is the executive director of the Gilroy Foundation, a community foundation serving South Santa Clara County in California. Born and raised in Gilroy, she brings a deep commitment to community-rooted philanthropy and to place-based investment that reflects the values, culture, and aspirations of the region she calls home. Alexandra Urbanowski is the CEO of SV Creates, the county-wide local arts agency in Santa Clara County. SV Creates builds the cultural sector's capacity through grant-making and technical support. In addition, they are joined by Eric Takashita, who is the director of the Culture and Community Power Fund. He has spent more than 25 years supporting community development with an emphasis on the role of arts and culture, previously working with ArtPlace and LISC, and among others. First, I will turn it over to Jackie and Alexandra for the first presentation.
Good morning or afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. It's still morning here. We're in California, Jackie and I, and so it's still morning here for us. We're delighted to be here and share some examples of work we've been doing to co-create ways in the Gilroy area for artists to lead in community development and healing. We're going to do this presentation kind of together, back and forth, because that's how we do the work in collaboration. So, Jackie, I think we'll let you start and tell people a little bit about who is Gilroy.
Thank you, Alexandra. Yes. Where and what is Gilroy? I'm sure, well, I'm not sure, but a lot of people don't really know where Gilroy is. But Gilroy is a small majority Latino community at the southern end of Santa Clara County, as Alexandra mentioned, in California. A lot of people know it or refer to it as the garlic capital of the world. But what's really important, especially for this conversation, is that it often gets left out of how people think about Silicon Valley. It actually has more in common with Central Valley communities. It's agricultural driven, working class, really strong cultural identity. And that context really shapes how we think about investment and what our community needs. I will pass it off to Alexandra to share more about SV Create.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little about who we are as the local arts agency, and then we're going to talk a little about why we focused on Gilroy in terms of our work. So we are a local arts agency, and we serve as the Arts Council for Santa Clara County, which is a diverse county of about 2 million people. It stretches through Silicon Valley to the agricultural communities south that include Gilroy. It's a challenging region for cultural workers and arts organizations to survive in because it is a region of super high costs, but low levels of philanthropic support for the arts. And I think this is something gets lost nationally. Folks don't realize that while there's great wealth in Silicon Valley, there's also a significant wealth gap and income gaps. And in fact, studies have shown that over 90% of philanthropic giving leaves the region. And so support for local place-based nonprofits is notoriously difficult to secure. And arts fall at the bottom often of that local place-based philanthropy, even what little is left when all the Silicon Valley philanthropy goes to global causes and to other places in the world. So as an intermediary and as the distributor of funding from county government and other partners, we seek to advance the diversity and move resources to historically marginalized art communities in our county and provide access to the arts for historically underserved populations. We partner with other funders like the Gilroy Foundation and other place-based funders and some national funders. Our primary programs include grant making, capacity building trainings and professional development for local arts and culture workers, and raising the visibility of artists through a magazine and related media platforms that we control and publish. I'm going to turn back to Jackie to talk a little about the foundation, who we partnered.
The Gilroy Foundation, we are a community foundation serving South Santa Clara County, and our role is really about connecting philanthropy to what's already happening on the ground. We work closely with donors, with nonprofits, with many community partners, but a big part of our approach is staying rooted in relationships. Because in a place like Gilroy, one thing we've learned is that trust really matters. So a lot of our work is focused on long-term investment, not just funding individual projects, but helping build systems and partnerships that can sustain the community over time. Alexandra? You're on mute.
Thank you. So SV Creates, as I mentioned, is the Arts Council for the entire county. But in 2020, we conducted a pretty deep dive assessment of our 40 plus years of programming and resource distribution to look at how we could commit to doing a better job of equitably serving the full county, not just the population center of the city of San Jose, the largest population center, realizing that we had particularly been paying not much attention to the southern end of the county, the greater Gilroy area, which was true for Gilroy, not just in the arts. Gilroy has received less resources from private philanthropy, from government, from all areas of funding for decades, even generations. So we were able to partner with some private foundations and with county government to engage in a strategic initiative to investigate how we could better serve the cultural community of Gilroy. As I mentioned, it had been underserved for decades and really even generations, and how cultural practices might be lifted to help heal community trauma and build bridges in a community that had experienced a lot of political divide and generational trauma. So that was sort of our why when we set out to do it. But then we spent 2 years building relationships, one person at a time, and building trust. We asked ourselves and everyone we met these questions as we just went in and said, here we are, we need to know what we can do. So trust first, of course. How do we build relationships and learn from the deep knowledge that already exists? The knowledge is there. How do we learn from that before we bring our resources to act? How do we use artists as the anchor point for building community throughout the Gilroy? Us as a local arts agency, that's our perspective, is how can artists be in the leading roles to build community? And how do we build connections between artists, service organizations, government, and business owners for the benefit of all? Joanna mentioned cross-sector, this cross-sector approach, which we'll talk more about later. And then how do we support in lifting up those homegrown voices that represent the community? Who's not being heard? And that's what we spent 2 years trying to just have people tell us and build relationships, as I mentioned, kind of one person at a time throughout the community. So I personally established a part-time workspace in Gilroy. Our organization is office-based in San Jose, but we wanted to be there in community. So we moved into part-time workspace in Gilroy. We engaged and paid local artists to advise us and be part of our collaboration. And then we started to co-develop programs with the local community, led by artists based on what we'd learned over the time and through convenings and individual conversations. We also included city government, local business leaders, and others, and were able to secure additional support for the work. The roundtables that you see mentioned here and other ongoing networks have launched partnerships, collaborations, and new programs. and they're now run organically and locally. So the Gilroy Arts Roundtable is a very robust monthly meetup that's led by artists locally, but it includes people attend it who are just art supporters. City council people attend it, local business people attend it, and it's really a place for networking and collaboration and people building partnerships. It actually has started to be a place that candidates running for city council come and listen and hear. So it's really built the artists' own muscle and network for being a voice in the community. We designed and fund a grant program, which was co-designed with the community, a group of local artists, really participatory grant making. It aims to support culturally relevant artistic work, raise the visibility and voice of local artists, engage the community and activate public spaces, catalyze this historically under-resourced arts ecosystem. And we're also working to encourage and leverage other funding for the arts in Gilroy, both from within Gilroy, but also from without throughout the state and beyond. And we've been able to rally public support of the arts as part of Gilroy's economic development. And we're really very encouraged by significant changes that we've seen in the past couple of years in local city leadership, both elected and staff at the city level in the past 2 years, which have aligned with our goals of cross-sector building through culture and cultural heritage. And you can see some examples of some of the other projects that have come organically through us being able to support this network and put the artists at the front. I wanted to give you a couple specific examples. Most of the artistic projects that we've funded, that our grants have funded, have gained momentum and continue annually, and have attracted other funders to support. One example that is in the 4th year and has built bridges across sectors and political divides is the La Frenda Day of the Dead Cultural Festival and Wellness Fair that shuts down most of the downtown streets. It's led by artists and is centered in cultural practice and cultural history and heritage, but it now involves all segments of community and is supported by many funders, and now is fiscally sponsored by the Gilroy Foundation. So there's a big role of us providing together, we're providing the infrastructure for artists to do the work that they need to do. And I think we want to show just a short video. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for being here again. Gracias por estar aquí esta noche. Me hace muy feliz ver a tanta gente todavía aquí. Thank you for being here, and I hope that this festival continues to grow, and it'll only grow with your continued support. You keep showing up, keep telling your friends and families about it, and I'm really hoping that we could put Gilroy on the map for something so beautiful that is very family friendly, that connects to everyone here. Everything that happened here tonight and has happened now for 2 years is not an accident, and I hope and I pray that everyone here returns next year, brings a whole another set of friends. Next year will be November 1st, so save the date and we'll see you next year. Thank you, everyone.
So that's just a little taste of sort of what that is about. It's now grown into an enormous festival over 4 years, and all volunteer artists and many other volunteers now running it. And now we've been able to start actually getting some of the artists paid. So that's also part of our goal, right? Is we want artists to be receive compensation for all this work they're doing in the community. Here's other photos of that festival and other projects led by artists in Gilroy that we've been supporting that now are ongoing, not just one-time projects, but ongoing in the community. This chalk festival, these art gallery, artist-driven shows, and those are just some kind of examples. And Jackie, I think you want to talk a little bit about how community foundations are important in this work.
Yeah, thank you. As a community foundation, our role in this work is a little bit different. So we're often the connector, bringing together funders, artists, local government, and community organizations. But just as importantly, we're also a translator, helping make sure that what funders are trying to do actually aligns with what the community is asking for without losing that local voice. And I think One of the biggest roles we play is as a sustainer. Communities like Gilroy have seen a lot of short-term investment come and go. So part of our responsibility is helping shift towards long-term commitment, building trust over time, and really making sure that the work actually sticks, because without that, the community doesn't engage in the same way. Alexandra?
Yeah, so what we're learning are all the things that Jackie's just said. We're learning that trust has to come before funding. And Eric might have said this when we were talking a few days ago, and I've heard it so many places, that this work happens, at the speed of trust. You have to build trust. And, one of the things that we found, when we, meaning me and my team, started to meet people and be introduced to people in Gilroy, was this skepticism of funders coming in and, doing some little thing, or over surveying people, or doing studies. And so there was a skepticism about, who are you coming into our community, and what is it that you're here for? And we, SV Creates, even though we are an independent nonprofit, we do operate under a contract with the County of Santa Clara. So we present as a little quasi-government. And there is skepticism about government in communities like this. So we had to overcome that as well. Partnership with artists. Artists are key partners for us. That they are our partners. They're not grantees. We move money their way when we can, and we have it, but they are the partners in telling us what needs to happen. And then the cross-sector work, a learning is that takes a lot of time, not just for the trust building, but also not only with us as the convener, but then across the sectors, building that trust, especially in communities where there hasn't been collaboration before. But that's what leads to the durable outcomes, right? That's what leads to this work being ongoing in nature and not just one-off projects, which is, again, as Jackie mentioned, not what we're trying to do. And then about the visibility, we're trying to find the voices that haven't been heard, that we want to make sure are in the leadership role. And I hopefully got a little taste in that video about this community is seeing themselves, and they show up to do this work and be in community together. And that's what's building the credibility and momentum, is when we're all there together doing this work for the long term. And it builds momentum, and we've been able to attract other partners in it. But there's lots of work still to do, right? So what happens next? This is this community wary, again, right, of this exploitive drop-in, both for funding and also being studied and surveyed and all of that. So we as SV Creates have to commit to this work long term. It's something our board is committed to. There's no seeding it and then walking away. We have to find the resources to continue to support whatever it is the artists in leadership positions want to do and feel is right for the community. It requires long-term funding, and we need partners to do that. So initially, we had private foundation funders that helped us launch this work, but they committed to only 3 years of funding. It was multi-year funding. It was very generous, but it was only for 3 years, and now it's gone. And those funders are on to whatever their next thing is, but they're not based in Gilroy, and they're not committed to that. So we have to look to how to replace that money to continue to fund the work. So we have to find funding partners who understand that this is what's required. Permanent, ongoing funding is what's required to support communities where artists are in the lead, and particularly communities that don't have a lot of wealth embedded in the community. I also personally see that there's an important role for government funding to serve arts in communities that don't have access to a lot of private wealth. We, again, are affiliated with county government. And what does county government do? County government is who's responsible for taking care of and supporting those who can't do things otherwise, whether it's healthcare, whether it's transportation, all the things that county government does. And so I think that there's a role for increased government support. And the thing, of course, with government support is, while it takes a long time to establish a new government funding stream, once you do, it's locked in and it's there in perpetuity. So something that I've been looking at exploring, and working with other partners exploring is whether there's the opportunity for state or county tax initiatives that we could look at in the future that could be dedicated to communities that have the need and dedicated to artists and arts initiatives and cultural cross-sector initiatives in these communities. So that's sort of what's next immediately for us. But I think the message that we share is this issue about building trust, listening to community, uplifting, collaborating, but then also being there for the long run and being long-term supporters of the work. And I think so with that, I know we're going to get into discussion and have time for questions later, but we want to hear from Eric and hear a little bit more from his example next.
Hooray, great. Thanks so much. Well, first, I just want to thank GIA for hosting this. I want to thank y'all for showing up. And I really want to thank Joanna, Jackie, and Alexandra for their comments. I really appreciate that. Again, my name is Eric Takashita. My pronouns are he, him. I am an Asian American man in it's showing up as a white, but it's kind of a checked shirt with glasses and salt and pepper, I guess mostly now salt tea color hair. In terms of land acknowledgement, I guess I will say that I pay taxes in the past, present, and future home of the Dakota people, otherwise known as Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm actually calling in today from Atlanta, Georgia. So, but I'm here. I'm just going to take a few minutes to kind of share a little bit about the work that I've been doing for the last couple of years as the Cultural and Community Power Fund. I also want to just take a moment to invite you all to, Jackie and Alexandra just shared a lot about their work. If you want to put any questions or comments or reactions in the chat, that would be great. I would also welcome you all to just introduce yourself in the chat, maybe who you are, what you do, where you're from, whatever. That'd be great. It would be great just for me to have a sense of who all's in the room as we're kind of walking through the conversation today. So with no further ado, my hope is to kind of share in the next few minutes an overview of the Culture and Community Power Fund, some of the things that we've been learning over the last couple of years, including kind of both the takeaways from our grantee partners, but also then some models that we've been building, and then a little bit about what we're planning to be doing moving forward. So with that, Culture and Community Power Fund was really established post ArtPlace. Joanna talked a little bit about ArtPlace. We were formed not as a continuation of ArtPlace, but it was 3 ArtPlace funders that formed the Culture and Community Power Fund: the William Penn Foundation, the Barr Foundation, and the Kresge Foundation. They saw that, hey, there's really something important about us being able to work together as funders, and really learning from as a local funder, as a statewide funder, as a national funder, how could we be collaborating and learning with one another? They also really saw the promise of what ArtPlace had started to kind of lay the groundwork for in terms of community planning and economic development and the role of art and culture in that. But, this is 2021, right? So saying, hey, but we really need to make sure that this work is really focused on equity and moving forward in an equitable fashion, but also that it can be sustained, right? That we understand, as kind of Alexandra just mentioned, that this work is longitudinal work, it's long-term work, it's generational work. And so how do we really start to think about making this work sustainable? So we, as the fund, were really set up to try to advance this idea of equitable and self-sufficient and self-determined communities moving forward. So you can see our mission and values here. You can also go to our website, which is cultureandcommunitypowerfund.org, like the longest URL ever, but you're welcome to go there as well and see all this also. Importantly, we were set up as a learning laboratory, right? We recognized, kind of in the spirit of Adrienne Maree Brown, that A, we don't have the answers, but also B, that we can't know the answers, right? That we are in a dynamic environment where things are constantly changing. And so it's important for us to really approach this with kind of a learning attitude. So we're set up as a lab. You can see here kind of our, if one were to say a logic model or a theory of change, if you read this from right to left, you say, hey, to get to equitable, resilient, and self-determined communities, it's really important to build community power, right? And we define community power as the ability for a community to set its own agenda, to take strides towards achieving that agenda, and then to be able to defend it when it comes under attack, because inevitably it will come under attack. And we then believe, furthermore, that not just you need community power, but that culture can be core to building community power. So this is kind of the premise that we set off with 4 years ago to say, hey, we believe this is to be true. This is kind of our thesis. Culture can lead to community power, and that can help support the development of equitable, resilient, and self-determined communities. Is that true? And if so, what are those elements? What would that look like? So that's a little bit about kind of the background. We have a particular grant-making structure that involves kind of 3 core components. One is that we give unrestricted awards. We don't give grants. We try to find partners that are deeply connected and accountable to folks in their community. We say, hey, you're doing good work that's trying to create systems change on any number of issues. As Joanna mentioned, we've worked with folks who are doing climate resiliency, economic justice, food security work, community safety work. It doesn't kind of matter what the issue is. What matters is that our partners are deeply connected and accountable to the community. They're working on some kind of systemic change, i.e. building power to do that. And they really have culture at the center of their work. We give them grant money. We say, hey, here's some unrestricted funds, ideally multi-year. Keep up the good work. Let us know what you're doing. It's a way for us to really learn what do grantees do when they get unrestricted money, right? So we can understand and document that. But it's also really a way of helping them to kind of shift the power from philanthropy into the hands of community. We're all about community power building, so we have to then be practicing ourselves. So one is awards. The second piece of our model is that we invest in community power building ecosystems. We recognize that community power, by its very definition, is not something that is effectuated or developed by a single organization, but rather something that's developed by a whole network of folk working in a place. So we work with our Connect organizations, our grantee partners, to actually then invest in their broader community ecosystem. So that's a second key piece of our model that we think is really important and somewhat unique, at least for the moment. We hope that it becomes more broadly adopted. So that's the second piece. And then the third piece, as you'll see here, is that we also support translocal learning. So rather than us as the foundation or as the fund trying to convene people on a regular basis and everybody come to some place, we did convene people once in person and we do some stuff on Zoom. But what we said is more important than that is y'all know what you want to see know what you want to learn. So why don't you go and visit one another when it makes sense for you to go see each other, to talk about what you want to talk about, when you want to talk about it, and then you should bring some other folks from your community with you. So part of our investment in our community partners was to say, hey, you should do this kind of translocal learning. You should really be able to figure out what it is you want to see and learn and be able to do that when it makes sense for you all. So just a little bit about grant making structure, hyperlocal investments that are really based on awards, ecosystems, and this translocal learning. So we've been doing this work for a couple of years. We invested deeply in 6 communities in 5 cities, in Philly, in Massachusetts, in Detroit, Memphis, and New Orleans. And we completed an evaluation last year in 2025 that started to say, here are some of the things, the key takeaways. So just kind of quickly, and as has been mentioned, Alexandra and Joanna kind of both mentioned this, so a lot of my thunder's already been stolen, but that's okay. Part of this is that what we saw was that really number one, the grant making model itself, that it resonated with people. This idea of unrestricted awards, self-directed learning, the ecosystem approach, all of these things kind of really resonated with our grantee partners. They found it to be incredibly valuable and things that we really wanted to be continued to support. Importantly, though, also people really had a much deeper understanding of this idea and the relationship between culture and community power, right? We started to be able to articulate as organizations and really as a fund, how these things tied together. And again, to kind of test our thesis, our premise that culture could be core to building community power. And what we saw was indeed folks on the ground saw that to be the case. And we have lots of kind of practice-based evidence, if you will, to support how culture is really an impetus and a core driver of community power building. In addition to that, we saw, and again, to kind of acknowledge that this is not new. This is something people have been doing literally for generations, right? And so the problem isn't so much that people don't know about it. It's more about how do we make this more legible, particularly to capital stewards, particularly to investors, right? So part of the challenge is not so much that people on the ground were doing this work, Maybe they didn't always have the language for it, and so maybe they didn't have the mental models for it. But part of the problem is also that we need to make it more legible for folks to invest in this work. We need to say, hey, this is actually a thing, and that we can invest in this, and we can get some really meaningful impact and output, kind of impact from this work. So that was another key takeaway. And then finally, the other kind of big takeaway that we had here was just this idea that community power, and again, not stating anything brilliant, but the community power is something that is longitudinal. This cannot be episodic. You do not build community power within a grant cycle, right? This is long-term work, and we need to be, as Alexandra said, we need to be in this work for the long haul. We recognize that change moves at the speed of trust, and that we need to actually do a lot of work to really heal communities. Philanthropy, for all of the good work we try to do, in many ways, we've actually we've actively worked against building community power by oftentimes pitting folks against one another and kind of asking them to compete with each other for what we perceive as scarce resources. And so part is that we actually need to do that healing. We need at the community level, folks need to heal. We need to restitch the connections. We need to really rebuild some of the community infrastructure. So part of our model is really to be shifting, as I said, the power from philanthropy and from the fund to the communities, giving them the resources to actually be able to start to practice how we build community power, practice having power, resources and power as a way of trying to advance this work. So that's a little bit about kind of the material outcomes. And if folks want to know, our evaluation report, all 45 pages of it, are on our website. So you can certainly go look at that and see some of the material impact that folks have had in communities. But I would suggest that as much as the material impacts, getting a housing bond passed, or helping to increase food security, or helping to support small business fund, investment fund, as much as that's critically important, I would suggest that equally, or perhaps more importantly, is the building of the infrastructure for those communities to be able to actually exercise and practice that community power that got those outcomes and achieve those impacts, right? That is, both of those things are important. So just quickly, I want to share, in addition to kind of the evaluation, not just showed us what happened on the ground, it also helped us surface some mental models, really in support of our goal of wanting to support philanthropy and kind of, again, translating this work to capital stewards. I'm going to run through these kind of quickly. The first one is really the spectrum of community involvement. When you think about, there's different ways that communities can be involved, right? Ranging from kind of communities kind of just being centered to really leading the work to true kind of ownership of the work. And to get self-determination, we're really seeking out that kind of ownership of the work. This next slide outlines how you can see the relationship of when you build community power, that's great. You can then make demands of other folks. But at the end of the day, we really are seeking for people to actually have the power themselves and to really be able to own and have the capacity to do things. So again, kind of this evolution, and that community power building is something that's ongoing. A third mental model I just want to spend a minute on is to say, this is kind of the impact framework that our evaluation partner helped us to develop, which outlines here, if you were to map community power building on the x-axis and art and culture on the y-axis, you end up with this kind of 2x2 grid. In the lower left, you have kind of direct service, right? So it's homeless shelters, food shelves, whatever. That may not be about community power building or about culture, but it's really important work, right? So this is not about shade. It's just to say that's one form. In the lower right-hand corner, you have kind of organizing, and that's often the campaigns, issue organizing, what have you, where it's about power building and about organizing, but art and culture may not show up in a direct way, or it's like puppets and posters, right? And the upper left-hand quadrant, you have where high arts and culture, but low power building. That's more when maybe an arts organization does a show about something like affordable housing, but there's no organizing or action people can take. And our work has really been focused, our partners' work has really been focused on the upper right-hand quadrant, where we're really trying to integrate culture as a core driver of and beneficiary of community power building. So just to acknowledge this is a framework and a way that people can kind of help organize or think about their work. As we did this evaluation last year, the funders said, gosh, everything going on in the climate right now, this seems like really important work. And the decision was made to not sunset the Culture and Community Power Fund at that time. And instead, we're moving into a second phase of our work. So we're going into CCPF 2.0. And my last slide, and then I know I need to wrap up, is to just talk about, we really see this as an opportunity. Oh, two more slides. We see this as an opportunity to really advance this work. And we have, of course, because in philanthropy, we love these things, we have a whole integrated theory of action. So this includes kind of our approach to the hyperlocal investment, as I said. It talks about the need for really weaving these national networks, both with practitioners so they can be connected, but also then that third tranche is about philanthropy. And as I've kind of alluded to, really we see it important, not just, partners are doing this work and we need to support that, but we also see part of our core work is supporting people in philanthropy to change how we're working as individual organizations, but also how we're changing our approach and our work in the field, whether that's how we're making our grants, moving towards the awards and unrestricted and ecosystems approaches, or if it's about how we think about kind of the mental models and really trying to build community power. So I know we want to leave enough time for discussion, so I'm going to kind of wrap up there and turn it back over, I think, to Joanna to help us with the facilitation of the conversation.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your work. It's really great to have the opportunity to see you reflect on what you all have been building over a similar timeline of the past 6 years or so. So I'm excited now to jump into some conversation. I want to get us started by thinking about how we set some of the foundations for what we're doing and thinking about building community trust. It seems like once you have this groundwork established, you all have been able to do some really powerful things with your community collaborators, but especially when facing generations of inconsistent support, as Alexandra and Jackie mentioned, or especially with SV Creates being in this quasi-government space, it's a challenge. How can we, as representatives of institutions, navigate this lack of trust and work to build new forms of trust? How have you done this with communities yourselves? What advice do you have?
Well, I just share a couple of things I learned that maybe aren't directly answered, but they contribute to the way I think about answering the question. One thing that I discovered, and I think me and my team, was when you go into a community to learn, you have to sort of be completely humble about what you don't know, and open to relearning what you thought you knew, and just saying, I don't know, tell me. And one of the things, one example that I really learned was that, we've been an quote unquote arts funder in the county for 40 years. But the cultural workers and practitioners in this community, they didn't think of themselves as artists. So they didn't think they were included. The work that they do is cultural work that's part of their lives and their communities. And we say an arts grant, and they're like, what? That doesn't speak to us at all. So that was something I learned about just the language that we use and the framing and the how we identify things that we have to find. I had to personally find advisors, interpreters to teach me how to be in the space and introduce me to other people. So that was one thing. And then the other thing related to this thing about maybe Eric mentioned or someone else about infrastructure. The other thing is that this community, there were not nonprofit arts groups. There were artists, individual artists working in collectives, working on their own, working in community, working in all kinds of different structures and formats. So there was no just people to apply to traditional grant programs. There wasn't that. And we didn't want people just to go form nonprofit organizations because we all have to be led by a tax code, right? That's a whole nother panel, right? That's a whole nother webinar. Why is this sector? So we then looked for how could we create that we could support them in doing the work in whatever format they want to do, whether it's the Gilroy Foundation becoming fiscal sponsors for everybody or other ways. So they can just do the work in whatever structure and way of doing it they want to do. And we would figure it out for them to make that happen. So those were some of the things I kind of learned about just being different and in community. So I'm sure Jackie and Eric, you have other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I think for us, building trust has really meant slowing down, being present before funding anything, listening more than we talk, and really following through with what we say we're going to do. What I've seen is a big shift has been moving from we're here to fund you to we're here to partner with you. It sounds simple, but it really changes how decisions get made and who holds that power in the process. And really it turns into community-led, community-driven, community voices showing up. So that I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, +1 on the humility part. But also just add for the Culture and Community Power Fund, I shared our values on one of the slides, but our first value is really following those closest to the ground. And so for us, it's really about saying, I don't know. I live in the Twin Cities. What the heck do I know about what's going on in Philadelphia or in Boston or in New Orleans, right? We need to depend on our community partners to really follow what they're saying and what they want. And that's my job, is to then be responsive and really to support them in that way. So I guess that would be my response. If it's okay, John, I'd love to respond to the question in the chat also, in terms of like, there was a question about kind of how cultural strategy across many regions that kind of vary from urban to rural, really different needs and what have you. And I guess, again, just invoking what I just said, right? For us as a Culture and Community Power Fund, yep, 100%. Things are going to look different in different communities. And so part of it is, again, following those closest to the ground and having a flexible enough model, right? There's kind of this, talking about mental models, somebody once described to me the difference between a broom and a mop, right? So a broom is very tight at the top and it's tight at the bottom, and it's very good for kind of sweeping. But a mop is kind of tighter at the top and loose at the bottom, right? And so we have much more of a mop approach, where it's like, hey, we have a set of values and we have a kind of approach, but how that actually gets deployed in any given community is completely dependent upon what's happening in that place at that time, given the people that are there in the situation. So I guess I hope that's sufficient an answer, but that's kind of, I guess, how I would say that we at least are approaching our work in that way.
Thank you,
I
Eric.
just add +1 for that to Eric, because this was one of the things for us specifically about doing the work in Gilroy, is the way we approach the Gilroy is not the same as we do in San Jose or in Palo Alto or in, some other community with some other characteristics. And I think that's the thing about it, all takes time, because you have to customize for every different community and population.
I think that's insightful. Thank you all for sharing. And thanks, Eric, for tying into the question from the chat. I guess to add one follow-up connected to that question for you, Alexandra, and SV Creates, in working with Gilroy and thinking about how that is a different context than other places that you work with, has this collaboration shifted how you work with other partners or changed how you look at your work from this greater platform?
Yes. So we, Gilroy, because of what we learned in Gilroy, it really taught us that all of our work needs to be customized, hands-on for every single arts leader or cultural worker that we work with. So all of our work now throughout the county is modeled on this approach that we call Arts Web, which is really about meeting every artist and arts leader where they are. It's super time consuming and labor intensive. And this is lesson to funder, right? We all have to be willing to spend the time, and the time is usually money. The time means I hire artists in communities that know their communities all around the county to help us do the work. So yes, the customization, the learning, and that's what we have to do if you really want the work to be led by artists, is we have to meet them where they are. Every little arts group, every artist, big or small, we got to meet them where they are, and we have to find out where they are to meet them where they are. So time is money, so we need everybody to invest in the time.
Definitely. It takes time, and you all are clearly dedicated to it, which is exciting. So following a little bit on this thread around artists and meeting them where they are and picking up on some of the concepts that you all brought up in your presentations, one of the challenges in funding this work is often the idea of what is arts and culture, or what does this foundation want to fund or not, or it's not me, I don't have time to apply, they're not going to fund me anyway, I'm doing my work. So it becomes kind of this nebulous thing according to who you're talking to, and it can make funding in this intentional way more challenging. How do you define this groundwork of what is arts and culture in this context for you, and who is seen as a part of it, or and I guess tied to that, how would you think about giving advice to someone else in terms of reframing within their constituencies who might also be included in that definition?
I'm going to chime in just real quick, and I'll leave it up to Alexandra and Eric to finish it up. But I think arts and culture is defined by the community, not the institution, right? So it's not just formal organizations or, as Alexandra mentioned, traditional art forms. It's cultural events, it's local traditions, it's storytelling, it's community gatherings, it's things that reflect identity and lived experience. And I think with that framing it that way, it really expands as who gets seen as part of the arts ecosystem. You know, as Alexandra mentioned, it includes artists that they may not even think of themselves as quote unquote artists in a formal sense, you know, but those are the ones that are absolutely shaping culture in the community.
Yeah, I'll just add, for the Culture and Community Power Fund, we have a very broad, we talk mostly about culture, not necessarily about the art. And I'm going to invoke one of our partners. So the former director of the Ashe Cultural Center, Carol B. Bell, she used to explain to me that how down in New Orleans, art may be the favorite daughter, but culture is the big mama, right? So culture is really how we see the world. It's how we interact with each other. It's the food we eat. It's the clothes we wear. It's the way we organize space and time. And so like, that's the culture. And I think, again, to underscore what Jackie said, I think if we define culture in that broader way, then it really does create a bigger tent to allow for more people to kind of come in and really be a part of the solution. I will also say that, you know, in your little bubble thing, Joanna, you talked about place. And I think that's another key part of this, is that really wanting to focus on love of place as a core driver. And so then it's really, what is the role of all of us, whether I'm an artist, a culture bearer, regardless of how I identify, is that I care about Gilroy. I care about Fresno. I care about, you know, 19133 in Philadelphia. And like, that's what is kind of becomes the binding agent, and really what is the culture of a place, right? And I think that's another piece. While I off mute, can I just acknowledge there was a question, I think, in the chat about seeing projects as current urban infrastructure and ecosystem. So if it's okay, I'll just respond to that quickly, which is thank you, Gonzalo, for that question. And absolutely, like for us as a Culture and Community Power Fund, it's all about the infrastructure, right? We see, again, the material impacts and the material outputs are super important, but it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. And like the 80% that's below the surface of the water is that community infrastructure. That's the connections between people. That's the inspiration. That's the healing work that has to happen. That's the restitching of the networks and building of trust at the community level. That is all critical to actually getting that work done. And as I said, to the point about ecosystems, that's not something that's about one organization. It's about everybody in the community. And it's not just about organizations, and it's not just about nonprofits. Right? Alexandra kind of mentioned this. This is about, you know, for us as the Culture and Community Power Fund, this is about, sure, the nonprofits, but it's also about like the grandma down the street. That's like where all the kids go after school. It's about the bodega on the corner where all the people are hanging out. It's about the business owners that get together for coffee at 7 a.m. every Thursday. You know, it's like all of those informal networks, and that's really the ecosystem. And I think for us as funders, as capital stewards, as philanthropy, we need to be kind of breaking loose of our mental model that is limited to just the 501c3 industrial complex. And we really need to be thinking about that broader infrastructure of all the different people and players that are within a community as we think about really wanting to invest in communities, not just in organizations.
Eric, that's so right on. Thank you for that. And I wanted to add to that also the individual artists. We think about how do we support and build, I'm not sure if infrastructure is exactly the right word, but build resources in a community so individual artists and culture bearers can work there and live there and stay there, and also be at the leadership tables. So that's part of what we're also investing in, is how do we empower artists to be on a city council, on an arts commission, on a planning commission, on a school board, on a, downtown association. How do we get artists into those leadership roles so their voices are in these other places cross sector? And that takes community infrastructure somehow to give artists to give them those opportunities and make them feel that people are going to listen to their voices.
Thank you. I think that what you're getting at there really ties into the second half of Gonzalo's question around funding an ecosystem rather than patronage of an organization by changing the conception of who is a local leader and who has the capacity to get there. So do you all see your work as contributing towards building an ecosystem? Like the work that you are doing is touching with how other pieces that are all a part of this greater infrastructure, urban, rural, whatever. Yeah, exciting. Well, it seems like we have some colleagues that agree on this call. I'm going to turn to there's another question in the chat from Sunny saying, for those of us working deeply in community, trust is built over time. How can grant makers align their funding practices to support that long-term relationship work, especially when it doesn't always fit neatly into traditional metrics or timelines? I know it's a lot. Well, there's going to be some advice.
Well, so I'll just I'll tackle this one. What do you mean how? Like the grant makers have to change their timeline. I don't know if it's how. I think it's we do. We have to, as I suggested earlier. I think for the Culture and Community Power Fund, we're very fortunate. We've been able to move towards this idea of awards, not grants, where we say, hey, you're doing good work and keep it up. This idea of high touch and high trust. I think this whole idea of movement towards trust-based philanthropy is part of that, and really recognizing the length of time. I think it's also about, we gave pretty significant unrestricted award, multi-year awards to our core partners. And part of it was to say, hey, do with this what you need to do, right? And so many of them use those resources for things like, operating reserves or to help really build infrastructure within their organization. So part of it is like thinking about how are we building a different type of community infrastructure and not just funding from project to project, from event to event, but really thinking about like, hey, how are we building the capacity of communities to really be able to do this work moving forward? Joanna, you mentioned earlier Springboard for the Arts, which I've had the good fortune of being able to work with them for a while. And one of the things is also just the importance of having ready reserves, right? Where you can have dollars because stuff comes up, y'all, and people need to be able to respond to it. And so when you have like reserve funds and capital that's actually set aside for you to be able to explore and test new ideas and react and respond to what's happening in your community, that's critically important, right? So it's part of this is about improving the financial health and well-being of organizations on an ongoing basis. And so I think to the question, part of what we can do as philanthropy is not focus on the episodic project-based investment, but really be thinking about how can we be building the long-term capacity of our community-based partners. So that's part one. The part on the metrics, I think, is critically important also. And that, part of what our partners are saying is that we need to develop a different set of metrics that work for us. And we need to then present those to our investors and say, here's what's important to us as community members, and here's what we want to have measured, and here's how we're going to be measuring that, right? And kind of presenting it as opposed to kind of a reactive waiting for philanthropy to say, oh, well, here, tell me your the whatever number of people served, oh, and certain character counts, right? Like, so whatever. But instead, like we want for the community partners to actually have the capacity. So as we move forward into 2.0, we're actually embedding our learning partner, HanKaoYu, to really help us work with our grantee partners to help them then develop the mechanisms by which they can create their own metrics and they can actually figure out their own kind of how they want to measure their progress, because that's what really matters. Like that, what matters to them, it should be what matters to us, right? So I think it's kind of creating this kind of symbiotic relationship between investors and community-based partners.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, it's not echoing everything you just said, Eric, but also, it's not about one big shift. Thinking strategically and what's going to be long-term and sustainable for these organizations. It's not one big shift. It's a series of smaller little strategically placed ones, how the decisions get made, who's at the table, how flexible the funding can be. And those small things add up to make, that big shift at the end.
I appreciate that perspective of the small shift. It makes it manageable. This is also making me think about how do you navigate internal systems change in an organization that maybe has been operating differently. One strategy is, I think, what Culture and Community Power Fund has been able to do by starting a new entity and is able to kind of from the get-go operate with different models is really exciting. How would you recommend that someone be able to get buy-in from their institution and colleagues towards some of these small shifts? Does it have to do with finding external partners? How do you build allies in advancing this work?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that's part of, just to name, I think that's part of what we're seeking to do in CCF 2.0, right? Part of it is that we believe, here's kind of our basic working model right now, is that we're trying to build the body of practice-based evidence to say, hey, here, if you work in this way, you can actually go further, faster, and be more accountable to your community partners. So part of it is like building the data set and kind of the evidence, if you will, is one part of the argument, I think. I think another part is actually, when you've met one foundation, you've met one foundation, right? So figuring out like within each institution, well, where are the opportunities and where are the pressure points? And so for folks that are on this call to be thinking about your own institutions, organizations, say, okay, well, what might we be able to do, right? And it could be, to Jackie's point, it can be very small changes, right? Like, let's change how we're thinking about character. Sorry, I'm just stuck on character counts today. But yeah, let's not do character counts on our applications, right? Let's reduce the friction for community partners, because every time we make people take more time filling out an application or a grant report or a final report, whatever, we're taking time away from their community, right? So what are the small changes we could do? Can we shift our work? I'm the chair of a foundation in St. Paul. We moved away from project-based grants to saying, hey, it's important for us to just give operating grants, right? We've also moved away from this idea that, oh, well, every couple of years you have to take a year off. What does that mean, take a year off? Like, the work doesn't end. So I mean, part of it is, I think we just every organization needs to look at itself and say, hey, why are we doing this? And I would suggest, again, for us, we want to center communities. And so if we start to center on what is the need of those closest to the ground, then how can we as philanthropy start to shift our focus there and really try to be more responsive? That would be my suggestion.
I would also add that, this thing of relationship building goes that direction too. So for me, as someone who feels passionately and strongly about this work and initiative, I also have to build relationships and trust with my board members and my funding partners and government people, all the people who I want to trust me to say, this is what we need to do. So we're building relationships in all circles to move the work all together. Jackie, I'd be interested in what you said, because you've actually driven the Gilroy Foundation in a significant new direction. Jackie took over the foundation at a time and has made radical changes in terms of their ability to be responsive to the community.
Well, I think to Eric's point, it really requires whatever your institution you're with to shift how you think about control. And for us as a community foundation, we're responding to the needs of the community. So it's easier for a community foundation because we're responding to what the community actually wants and needs and listening to them. So it's creating space for a community input where they can actually influence decisions. And one of those small changes that we made was, Eric was talking about grant reporting and final reports. I mean, those are just tedious. And which organizations, especially grassroots organizations, boots on the ground, has time to do that? So one small change that we did was the way that the grantees submitted their final reports. Instead of them filling out another PDF document or something, we actually are taking it on. We go visit our grantees and do site visits, and we're just asking having casual conversation with them, but really listening to what they're saying, what was a roadblock for them, what worked, what didn't work, and then we're taking it back and we're writing up the final report, so to speak, to put in there.
Those are all really important changes, right? It's making the effort to reflect on your practices in an honest way, but is dramatically changing what is possible for your communities, your partners, your collaborators. That's all really exciting. So I think that everyone has given us great inspiration today, which I think is really fantastic. So thank you. And kind of bringing it together, I'm interested in looking forward and to hearing from you all about what is your dream for the future of this funding strategy and the community of practitioners that are doing this work as it continues to grow and shift, and we respond to some of the ideas and tactics and motivations that you've shared today. What are your future dreams for us?
Well, I'll chime in and start. I think my hope is that this kind of work becomes the norm, not the exception. I think because ultimately the goal isn't just to fund programs, it's really to build communities where people see themselves and they feel connected and they have a real role in shaping what happens next and what comes next in their own community.
That's beautiful, Jackie. I don't know what I would have to add. I guess in addition, just that in addition to that, that the long term, that the funding and the resources are there in the community for the community to decide what to do with it and in what way, and not needing some kind of intermediary like us to help move it forward, that we've moved it, we've empowered, and we move out and we're gone, and the community has all those resources and ability embedded in them.
Yeah, here. I want to just plus one what both Jackie and Alexandra said. When you ask the question, Joanne, my dream, my goal is for the Cultural and Community Power Fund to not have to exist, right? I want to work myself out of a job. I want for this to become the normal way for philanthropy working writ large. I want to see more resources being shifted into community control. I want to see self-determined communities, right? That's kind of my dream. I will maybe just share, I'm at the Mission Investors Exchange here, their annual conferencing in Atlanta, and somebody in a session this morning was talking about how, they're a spend down foundation, but they're actually not, spend down is the wrong word. What they're really doing is they're transferring assets, financial assets, from their balance sheet to the community's balance sheet. And I think that that's part of what I would like to see, is for us to be thinking about how are we responsible and accountable to communities in a way that we can actually help to shift resources to their balance sheets. And so they have more control and autonomy moving forward.
That's all really exciting. It sounds like we want to do some radical reimagining of the ecosystem that we are supporting to no longer center the necessity for the existence of this type of organization, which is really exciting. The future is rapidly changing, and thank you for your leadership in taking us forward. I will pass it back over to Jamie.
Yeah, thank you, Joanna, and thank you so much to our speakers. Today's conversation reminds us that place-based investment in arts and culture is not just about project funding, but building relationships, redistributing power, and co-creating futures with communities. From navigating local power dynamics to redefining who and what is centered in arts and culture, today's speakers highlighted both the complexity and the possibility of cross-sector collaboration. They challenge us to examine how our internal systems, definitions, and decision-making processes either reinforce or disrupt inequalities. At GIA, we remain committed to supporting funders in this ongoing work, to listen more deeply, to partner more authentically, and to invest in ways that strengthen community power and long-term sustainability. We invite you to carry these insights to your institutions, partnerships, and communities as we collectively work toward a more just and vibrant cultural ecosystem. So you'll see on the screen here, we have a QR code if you have any feedback about today's webinar for our speakers, and then a little promotion for our next webinar, which will be on May 12th, Culturally Responsive Grant Making. And just as a reminder, all the slides from today, the recording, all the questions will be shared out with attendees. Thank you all so much for joining us.